where we're going to talk about the Sanusi tradition. What is it? Who is it? Why is it? All of those things. All right, let's get to the iPad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد ونور الهدى والقائد إلى الخير والداعي إلى الرشد نبي الرحمة وإمام المتقين ورسول رب العالمين لا نبي بعده كما بلغ رسالتك ونصح لعبادك وتلا آياتك وأقام حدودك ووفى بعهدك وأنفذ حكمك وأمر بطاعتك ونهى عن معصيتك ووالى وليك الذي تحب أن تواليه وعاد عدوك الذي تحب أن تعاديه وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد اللهم صل على جسده في الأجساد وعلى قبره وعلى روحه في الأرواح وعلى موقفه في الموافق وعلى مشهده في المشاهد وعلى ذكره إذا ذكر صلاة منا على نبينا اللهم أبلغه منا السلام كما ذكر السلام والسلام على النبي ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته اللهم صل على ملائكتك المقربين وعلى أنبيائك المطهرين وعلى رسلك المرسلين وعلى حملة عرشك وعلى جبريل وميكائيل وإسرافيل وملك الموت ورضوان خازن جنتك ومالك صل على الكرام الكاتبين وصل على أهل طاعتك أجمعين من أهل السماوات والأرضين اللهم آت أهل بيت نبيك أفضل ما آتيت أحدا من أهل بيوت المرسلين وجزي أصحاب نبيك أفضل ما جزيت به أحدا من أصحاب المرسلين اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات واغفر لنا ولإخواننا الذين سبقونا بالإيمان ولا تجعل في قلوبنا غلا للذين آمنوا ربنا إنك رؤوف رحيم اللهم صل على النبي الهاشمي محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم اللهم صل على محمد خير البرية صلاة ترضيك وترضيه وترضى بها عنا يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم كثيرا تسليما طيبا مباركا فيه جزيلا جميلا دائما بدوام ملك الله اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله ملء الفضاء وعدد النجوم في السماء صلاة توازن السماوات والأرض وعدد ما خلقت وما أنت خالقه إلى يوم القيامة اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Pause here for a minute of dua because it's Wednesday between Dhuhr and Asr is a time of dua and a sa'a of ijabah. Sallallahu barak ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. I recently commented on a video that stated the following. It stated that someone who doesn't pray is a kafir. So does this exist in how do we react to that? Well, the first question comes with the facts. Is it true? Did anybody say that in the past? And the real question is this a matter of nas or ijtihad? So fiqh is the realm of ijtihad. That means a text of Quran or Hadith that can be read one way or another. This is like the number one most important thing that I think students of knowledge should all understand and know about, is to separate what is nas and what is ijtihad. Okay. Let me pull that up. So let me repeat this. Certain things are nas, unequivocal text. Okay? Unequivocal text. What does that mean? That means there's no interpretation. There's not even room for interpretation on the subject matter. Do you need a scholar to analyze for you and give you the conclusion on Tawheed, that there's one God? When you read the Quran, it just comes right out off of every single page. And you don't need any scholar to tell you that there's one God. You need any scholar to tell you that angels exist? No. You need any scholar to tell you that you have to pray? Of course not. Okay. So, anytime that you hear a saying, a statement, a ruling, then the official, then the first thing that you need to do is see, is this nas or ijtihad? Let me give you another example. Is the prohibition of pork by nas or ijtihad? It's obviously by nas. We all know that. All right. What about the prohibition of lobster? Is it nas or ijtihad? It's ijtihad, without a doubt, right? Ijtihad of who? Abu Hanifa. How about the prohibition of horse? It's ijtihad. Where does ijtihad come from? Ijtihad, which means scholarly opinion, does not mean he pulled it out of his own whims. It means it's opinion based upon Quranic text that could be read one way and could be read another way. Okay? So in that video by Imam Asim Hakim, because he's I think Indonesian origin, but he lives in Saudi. Probably got a great personality, and he gives a lot of Hanbali opinions. But I find that, and to be fair to him, they're clipped, so you don't know what he said before or after. So you have to be fair. But the one comment I would make is that it needs to, for the listeners and the viewers of such a clip, to know that the valid statement that he made, that someone who does not pray is a kafir, is a statement of ijtihad. And it is abandoning the prayer out of laziness is disbelief and takes a person out of the fold of Islam, according to the Hanbali school. Okay? According to the Hanbali school. And such salah, you don't get the right to make it up. Because making it up eliminates the sinfulness of it, right? So it's not that you don't have to make it up. No, you don't get the right to make it up. Let's take another example of that. Sujood as-sahw is a sunnah to do. If you forget a sunnah by accident, then the reward of it's gone, right? So Allah Ta'ala gives you the ability to regain that reward by getting 2 sajdas. If you intentionally leave off one of those sunan, you don't do sujood sahw because you purposely left it off, so you don't get the reward back. Right? You get the opportunity to get the reward back. So, it's important to say this, and the basis of the ijtihad is inna bayna ar-rajul wa bayna ash-shirk wal kufr tark as-salah, and al-ahdu alladhi baynana wa baynahum as-salah faman tarakaha faqad kafar. Okay, the oath or the covenant between that differentiates us from pagans, kafirs, mushriks, whatever, is the prayer. Whoever leaves it off, okay, has made kufr. So you say, oh, how is there ijtihad when there's a very clear-cut hadith here? Well, leaves it off meaning what? What's the meaning of leaving it off? Does it mean he stopped believing in it? So that, all of them agree. If you leave off, if you don't believe in salah, that's kufr. You don't even believe in it anymore. Whereas, if a person had left it off by laziness, then we don't call such a person a kafir. In the other 3 schools, but the Hanbali school does, because you left it off, right? You left salah. So their reading is valid. Likewise, the other 3 madhabs is valid. So therefore, it's only important anytime a matter of ijtihad is uttered, it needs to be clear that it's ijtihad. What's the difference now? If you were to say, no, I don't believe that, no problem. To reject the ijtihad of a scholar, meaning you say, I don't think it's correct. I disagree with it. Okay? You haven't done anything wrong. There's no consequence to it. Now, it's not up for a non-scholar to say it's an invalid ijtihad. That's a big difference between saying, I disagree, and it's an invalid ijtihad. And this is where common folk should really know their limit. But in this day and age, I don't believe anyone should stay common folk. Keep learning. Learn, because information's all over the place now. So easy to get information. So this idea that we're gonna all right, you're just a common folk, just sit there and be quiet and listen to us, that day's over. Information's everywhere. So now learn how to deal with the information. So that if you hear a religious ruling from Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi, Ahmed, there used to be like dozen mujtahid imams, but their schools of thought all died off, faded away. They had no students anymore. So all we have is like a historical record, and we don't practice our religion based on a historical record. We have to have certainty that that's what he said. So we have historical record on the ijtihad of Sufyan al-Thawri, of Hassan al-Basri, of al-Awza'i, of Sufyan ibn Uyayna. But in religion, وَلَا تَقْفُ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ, don't take an action, a stand on something unless you have absolute certainty. So therefore, we don't take a position. We don't act upon a mere historical record. There could have been a typographical error. It could be a publishing error. How do we know for sure? Whereas the books of the 4 madhabs, the living chain of scholars exists until today. So that if I was to say, hey, everybody, Maliki madhab says this, whether I write it in a book or I put it in a video, what's going to happen? A Maliki can correct me. He's alive today. They're all living. They correct each other, self-correcting. Okay? So it is not for somebody, except a person of knowledge, to say that this opinion is invalid. But he may say, even if he's not a person of knowledge, it doesn't sit right with me, I disagree. That means the person, just imagine somebody who lives in Maine, and you're going to now say to him, lobster's haram. Right? But the whole economy of half the people there is based on eating lobster, or Alaska king crabs. Right? That's that doesn't sit right with me, I'm not doing it. He hasn't done anything wrong, because it's an opinion based upon fiqh and ijtihad. Whereas nas, the word nas means unequivocal text. Unequivocal. قطعي الدلالة. You should know this term. It's one of the biggest things we teach here at ArcView and Nothing But Facts. What is the meaning of qat'i ad-dalala? It means explicit in its indication. Like it's crystal clear what it means. Okay? Crystal clear what it means. There's no two ways of interpreting this. So that, however, if you reject that, now you're falling into a problem. You've passed a red line. Now that red line would be one of two red lines. Thin red line or a thick red line? What's the difference? If that matter of the qat'i ad-dalala, that the transmission of it is so far widespread that anybody who lived 5 years in a Muslim community, even a child, knows this, then you're out of Islam. Because that's literally how we define Islam. Okay? Things that if you were to live in a normal Muslim community, a class here or there, a Jum'ah, okay? Things like that. If such a person, it is impossible for him not to know. Known in religion by necessity does not mean everybody knows it. Because if a Muslim kid was taken and raised in a society like in town in Iowa with no Sunday school, no Friday prayer, then he wouldn't know these things, so therefore it's not known by necessity? No, that's not what it is. Known in religion by necessity, that thick red line, is that if you were raised in a regular Muslim society, with Jum'ah, a couple classes here and there, Taraweeh, regular, as we all know, it's impossible for you not to know this. Is it possible for someone to be raised up, to go to Sunday school, to go to a Muslim, have Muslim parents, and not know that the Prophet is the final messenger of Islam? Not possible. That there's one God, that there's something called Hajj, go to Mecca. Any kid by 7 years old, he knows this. There's some called Hajj, and it happens in Mecca. Medina is the city of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Salah is 5 times a day. Alcohol is haram. Pork is haram. It's known in religion by necessity. That's a fat red line right there. You cross that, you're out of Islam. Doesn't matter how many times you say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. Does not matter. You're out of Islam. But then there's a thin red line, which is a lot more things, which is things that are qat'i ad-dalala, but it's not well known. It's not well known. Only someone who learns and studies would know it. That's why they say it's known by necessity to the scholars. The other category is known by necessity to all Muslims. So that, if you negate that, something of that category, you're sinless until you're informed and shown the clear-cut, explicit qat'i ad-dalala nas. Then we would say, listen, this is a very important doctrine. Okay? Now we've showed you how clear-cut it is. If you still persist on rejecting it, then unfortunately I have to tell you, Allah says in the Quran, your deeds will be nullified. All your good deeds, pause button, are hit. They don't go up to the heavens anymore. Hit the pause button. Okay? Until you fix your belief, then all your good deeds, you can have them back. Okay? And that person, we would call him a bid'i, also known as a fasiq in Aqida. Okay? And that person, now there's going to be some distance between us. Okay? We won't sponsor him. We won't support him. All those things. You understand the difference now? Example. Saying Isra and Mi'raj was a dream. Popular example. Things like that. Saying that jinn, jinn exist, but they're just different people. It's a tribe of people. Okay? Right? Things like that. Uthman. Q is here. What's happening, UQ? Look what's up here. Your logos. Okay? UQ is here. Take a seat, UQ. And can I ask you to do some gymnastics here? Jump all through all these wires and point this at Uthman, please. Okay. Yeah, Uthman. Is Uthman's mic on? Kindly, Ya Uthman, give me an example of a bid'ah mufassiqa. Yeah. Here's another example of a bid'ah mufassiqa. No, what? I didn't. No, just leave it there and just turn it, because that may be too close to him. Yeah. Sorry, I wasn't clear enough. You see this sword, Ya Uthman?
Yeah.
How cool is this sword?
It's great. Who sent it to you?
Yeah. This is from Australia. Look. Oh, that is a cool shot right there. See that? Why do you have so many swords? No, because these are just, for fun. We're not actually applying hudud on anyone. Okay, so let me say another one. For example, bid'ah mufassiqa is to say that is to insist, for example, that I can break my fast in the middle of the day of Ramadan if I start my travel, even if after dhuhr, after Fajr. But I'm a traveler. So he's blurred the lines incorrectly on where a person is a traveler. Right? Things like that. So there are other bid'ah mufassiqas in Aqida. Give us a bid'ah mufassiqa in Aqida, yeah. Yep. That would be bid'ah mukaffira. Yeah.
Now, in the case of might not be.
Correct.
In other words.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not.
Correct. What's an example?
I'm trying to think.
I say the top off of my head is what the Shia say about the Sahaba. To say Abu Bakr, Umar ibn Khattab, he is a fasiq who betrayed the Prophet. Yeah. To say Aisha betrayed the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. To say that God is bound by justice. For example, the Mu'tazili. His voice is muted, by the way.
It's closer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Voice test for Uthman.
Testing. Bismillah.
Testing. Can you all hear Uthman?
Bismillah. Can you guys hear me?
No, his voice seems to be coming through here. You see, all these are bid'ah mufassiq.
Is it on max over there? You're on max. Okay.
So the reason
I have to eat
wait,
the mic like
why
this?
is it so? Why would he have to be so close? Now
it's been a year and a half since I've come here, and same issues, same technical problems.
It's crazy, bro.
Testing 1 2 3. Okay.
Now he's perfectly now good now.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's give another example of bid'ah mufassiqa, or let's talk something about the bid'ah mukaffira. And Uthman, the reason I brought this up was because Asim al-Hakim, he had a clip where he says that if someone abandons the salah, he does not do salah, he's a kafir.
Yeah.
That's the Hanbali opinion.
Yes.
So the only thing I said about that is I would add the importance of noting that is a ruling based on ijtihad, not a nas.
Yeah.
And that just helps clarify debating and arguing. Because you're going to have some people say, no, nobody said that, Shafi, there's no verse for that. No, just say that there is, and it's a valid opinion based on the reading of a hadith. Man tarakaha faqad kafar. العهد بيننا وبينهم الصلاة فمن تركها فقد كفر. So what is the meaning of تركها? ترك الإيمان بها? Whoever leaves off salah is a kafir. First of all, the hadith itself can be discussed, but we're not even going to get into that. Let's just assume it's a sahih hadith. But what does the tark mean here? Leaving belief in it? That's what we say, right? That's what everyone says. Or leaving it off out of laziness. That's what Imam Ahmad added. So can anybody say that this is wrong? No, nobody could say it's invalid. But we must note that this is a statement based upon ijtihad, not a statement based upon nas. What's the difference is that they still can't hear him, by the way. And some people say the audio is fine. Everyone's got different hearing. But some people, the difference is if there is an opinion based upon ijtihad, the common man, if he says, nah, it doesn't sit right with me, I'm not believing it, he's okay. But if he says it's invalid, he's out of his depth. That he has to stop there. He has to say, I don't know if this is valid or not, but I'm not following it. Because it's based on ijtihad. He doesn't have to follow it. He doesn't have to follow the Maliki opinion that eating horse is not allowed. We just lost the Mongolian vote. Right? That's why they became Hanafi. Right? And a guy from Maine does not have to believe that eating lobster is haram. Right? He doesn't have to believe that if he wants. But what they cannot do, because they're not scholars, is say that this ijtihad is invalid. That you can't say. And that's a difference, because if I tell you a nas and you say, nah, I don't believe it, then you could be either in bid'ah or in kufr, or in fisq or kufr. And the only difference between fisq and kufr, what's unified in them? All your good deeds are invalidated. And all your good deeds, they don't go up anymore to the heavens. What's the difference between them? One of them, if it's known by necessity that anyone who is raised in a regular Muslim community would have known this by like the age 10, then you're a kafir. And now we have to enter a second point here. And while we do this, Ya Alifu, Uthman, can you make his camera image the same exact size as mine?
I think he's closer.
He's a little closer, but at least make it somewhat, because
It's like
I'm like this,
yeah.
and Uthman's head is like this on the screen. All right, because I see both screens. I see this one, and I see whatever the second one is. All right. So what's the difference is that the ta'yin of the kufr of a person, it has rules and it has implications. It has legal implications. And because it has legal implications, it cannot just be done by anybody. Right? Shrink it more, Ya Alifu. Okay. It has legal implications. Therefore, a judge has to do it, not just us. And that's a whole difference. You know, Uthman, I was thinking, there's probably a lot of people, scholars, who said something is kufr and were incorrect about it, right?
It's possible. Yeah.
So why does that not draw such a hoopla? And then when Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab does the same thing, it draws a hoopla. It's because he went and acted upon it, right? Mm-hmm. That's the main difference. I'm sure we can go into books right here and find what makes someone a kafir, and find a scholar had a slip up, had a mistake, and he listed something as kufr that actually isn't, right? Or he made it general and he didn't put the conditions. But that scholar was sitting writing books. He was not the hakim of a state, then incorrectly went and implemented that on other Muslims, right? And when I've talked to people and I ask them, is this kufr? And he says, yes, kufr. So I said, well, so-and-so says it. Do you say he's a kafir? They say, oh, I'm not crossing that line. Okay? I'm not going to cross that line, because there's all sorts of legal implications. Now you are saying this guy's marriage is fornication. Mm-hmm. You know that? His marriage is fornication. Doing business with him becomes, everything about him becomes changed now, has legal implications. So that's what we call ta'yin, which is specifying the person with kufr. Okay. I tell you, so many people in the past have made statements incorrectly assigning something as kufr, right? But because they never passed the Rubicon, crossed the Rubicon, or crossed the desert of Najd and made ta'yin and said, you yourself, Fulan, son of Fulan, are now a kafir. So that's one thing. So now there's another Rubicon after that, which is now I'm in charge of the city, of the state. Come and give me that neck of yours so I might strike it. And that's exactly what they had done, right? That's what they did. And there's one guy out there, he said the only difference between Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Abdul Wahhab is that Ibn Taymiyyah didn't have power. If he did, he would have applied it and executed all these people doing istighatha. But hold on a second. Ibn Taymiyyah lived alongside of al-Bakri, and they had that disagreement. So then if he believes truly he's a kafir, then he shouldn't associate with him, right? But when al-Bakri was in trouble, Ibn Taymiyyah very nobly, in a noble way, okay? That's a weird word, right? In a noble manner, helped him. He helped him when he was in trouble. You go help a kafir, a murtad, zindiq, you shouldn't, by sharia, because he has something called al-udhr bil-jahl. Okay? For those who don't know what crossing the Rubicon means, it's when you pass something, there's no return. And what does that come from? It comes from Julius Caesar bringing the army into Rome. There should never be an army in Rome. That was a law. He crossed the Rubicon and brought the army into Rome. Khalas, there's no going back. And he took over. So the ta'yin of kufr is a different subject. The kufr can be, or the error can be in the wording, the meaning, and the individual. We divide it into three categories like that. And it's easy to say that the wording is kufr. It takes more knowledge to say that the meaning, to see if the meaning is kufr, more research, see if the meaning is kufr. And then lastly, the person being a kafir, all right, has rulings upon it. So that's why most of the ulama has said, leave that off, leave that to a judge, because he would also have to say, your marriage is invalid, your kid's going to be taken away, your business is dissolved, you're excommunicated from the whole society, and give us your neck so we may strike it. All right, let's get to our program here. Uthman. Uthman, of course, as you see him here on the screen, is the director of Dar al-Fath, but he's all Dar al-Fath here in New Jersey. Seminary here in New Jersey. We're on what, year 3?
Year 5.
Year 5. And we have classes 4 times a week. And it was actually started, cooked up in this room. But then he's now also heading up part of our online program. And Edifu, you're going to pull up the website while we do this, which we're calling the Sanusi tradition. Yeah, Uthman, tell us, man huwa Sanusi, first of all.
Okay.
And then what is the Sanusi tradition?
Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa zid wa barik ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على سيدنا محمد صلاة تخرجنا بها من ظلمات الوهم وتكرمنا بها بنور الفهم وتوضح لنا بها ما أشكل حتى يفهم أنك تعلم ولا نعلم وأنت علام الغيوب ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله السميع العليم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله السميع العليم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله السميع العليم ومن يعتصم بالله فقد هدي إلى الصراط المستقيم صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. So yeah, before we get into who is Imam Sanusi and talking about what exactly is this program, I thought that it might be a little bit of a better idea to actually go into the background of why is a program like this necessary, and to take a little bit of a step back before talking about any individual person.
Critical. So
I guess the best place to start would actually be what is the tradition? This is a very big question. And what you see today is, especially among youth, especially people who are theologically or philosophically interested, and inclined towards these conversations, that there's an incredible amount of tension that I find working with young people on what is the tradition of Islam. Like, what is, when we talk about the tradition and when we talk about the Sharia, what exactly do we even mean by that? And you can almost begin to trace a pattern that there's this tension that has arisen most likely following after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, you see, and the onset of colonialism and the colonization of the Muslim countries.
Yeah.
And what follows this is also the colonization of the mind as well. And as a result of that, you begin to see that Muslims across the world are scattered and they're fragmented. And there's this collective kind of tension and this, desire to go back to what we used to once be. And as a result of that, there's so many movements that seem to be very different from each other. But what you begin to see is that they actually all share in certain common patterns that begin to develop. So off the top of my head, within the past 300 or so years, what you could begin, you see that there's all of these movements that are rising up. You have Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab with the Najdi Dawah. You have the Muslim Brotherhood. And you might think that, okay, that's one group that we can talk about. And
modernist Salafis.
Yeah. And now you have other traditional groups that are there as well. For example, in the subcontinent, you see various groups begin to rise up. One example of that would be the Deobandi tradition. Then among, you see that there's so many groups, and the turuq of the Sufiya, you begin to see that they have this type of thinking. And if we were to just sit here, we can begin to talk about all of these other groups that are out there, and we can probably compile a list of 10 to 15 various movements that are there, all of which are trying to make a claim about what is the tradition. And some of them are correct. For example, we would say that the Deobandi tradition, they are trying their very best to approximate what was the Sunnah like. Of course, they're from Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. But you have it makes you wonder, where is this tension coming from? And the tension is coming from the fact that we're all trying to identify what makes us Muslim and what makes us a collective, because we don't have a central authority anymore to tell us, this is what is like heterodoxy and this is what is orthodoxy. It's funny that you were talking about takfir and bid'ah before this, because one thing that's important to keep in mind is that kufr and bid'ah, someone, whether they're a kafir or whether they are a mu'min, is something that it's not on us to judge in the akhirah, right? For someone, where is their ultimate end, whether they will receive salvation from Allah Ta'ala, ultimately that's actually something that we have no idea about, because one can be a mu'min in everything that they say and everything that they do, but inside of their heart, Allah Ta'ala knows that they don't have an ounce of iman. So what then, what does it mean when we do this act of takfir?
Yeah.
And takfir, when you look at it, it's an action that you're doing. And so whose right is it to make takfir and to judge and deem someone to be a kafir? And when you talk to the ulama, what they'll say is that it's actually the right of the qadi. It's not the right of the theologian, even though the theologian plays an important part in it. But there are many examples that you'll find of, people who had beliefs that would have taken them out of Islam, or beliefs that, they're clearly mubtadi'ah, and the qadi of the time, or the ruler of the time, whoever is the, central authority of the time, is not going to do takfir of them for whatever reason. There may be a maslaha that they see. For example, they could say that, well, to do takfir of someone with such political capital at this time is actually going to be worse off for the Muslims than if we were to just leave him alone and, sequester him. So for example, someone like Ibn Taymiyyah that you see, what do? They don't kill him, even though some of the Malikiyah, right, they're ready, they draw out their swords and they're ready to kill him. But at the time, what's a better political tool to use, for example, is to imprison a person or to place them under house arrest. Even, for example, in the modern world, you see that's like Sayyid Ahmad Alawi al-Maliki. He was completely against the beliefs of the Wahhabiyah. But what's done to him is because of the fact that he's so beloved by the people, the government realizes, well, killing him is not the right way forward. Giving him the death sentence is not the right way forward. Let's place him on house arrest and let's just make his life more difficult so that, that he's not able to get the message across, and to reach the people that are listening to him, right? Just because and of course they believe that he's a kafir, right? And Sayyid Ahmed Alawi al-Maliki, he has this very famous statement where he's talking to one of the great, like the I forgot if it was Ibn Baz or Ibn Uthaymin.
Al-Maliki?
Yeah, he's speaking to him.
His son?
No, Sayyid Ahmed Alawi al-Maliki. He's speaking, there's an incident that occurs where there's a man,
Muhammad al-Maliki.
Yes, Muhammad Alawi al-Maliki.
Yeah.
Did I say Ahmed?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. His Sayyid Muhammad Alawi al-Maliki. So I believe it was Ibn Baz or Ibn Uthaymin, one of them. And they have a conversation, and it's a very cordial conversation.
Yeah.
And then Sayyid, he says at the end of the conversation, like they're laughing and they're joking around. And after he leaves, he says to him, "This man is never going to pray on me. In my funeral, he's not going to be present." Because the Wahhabiyya didn't consider him to be a Muslim. They considered him to be a kafir internally. Yeah. But they just couldn't say it.
It was too politically
It
would have caused so much problem for Saudi. Very similar to Sayyidina Ali. He didn't prosecute the killers of Uthman right away for a similar reason.
So my point in all of this is a little bit of a side conversation, but the point is that we live in a time where back in the day, it would be incredibly easy for us to figure out what is the normative tradition, what does it mean to be Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and what does it not mean? And the reason why is because you have the central authority that is going to be making it very easy for the common Muslims. You see that the governments, the Muslim governments, all the way until the Ottoman Empire, of course there's, many exceptions to this, but generally speaking, even the very corrupt ones, like for example, you look at the Umayyads, and you look at many the Ottoman Empire, you'll find the kings and the sultans and stuff like that. They're engaging in all sorts of sins of the flesh, but they wouldn't dare touch the Quran and the Sunnah and to change the religion of Allah, because they know that the mandate for them to rule is actually coming from Allah and His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they know that the people, as soon as if a person starts to, change the religion, then, they're going to lose that mandate. So they do whatever they do in their private lives. They drink, they fornicate, they commit adultery, and they have no issue with that, but they wouldn't dare change the religion, which is why, and this is something that you find is very impactful upon them, that when someone changes the religion, when someone comes with a new idea, these corrupt kings and queens and sultans and whatnot, they actually consult the Sunni ulama and they ask, what should we do about such and such person? And sometimes heads roll off, and sometimes they're imprisoned, and sometimes they're placed in house arrest, but they defer to the ulama about this. And now we live in a time where that system does not exist anymore. And so you see that there's such incredible tension that has formed among the curious, intellectually interested, philosophically minded Muslim today, because it's what is the Sunnah? And what you find is that that there's no such clear answer, that you find that there's so many different groups and so much different noise out there that it's hard to identify what does it mean to be Muslim anymore. Yeah. So this is kind of the background. Now I'll talk a little bit about like my life and my journey. At one time when I was in high school, I was actually considering to go into academia. And you were actually one of the people who discouraged me. You said it's a complete waste of time.
Great. Alhamdulillah, I succeeded.
Back in high school, because this was something that I was interested in. Because generally speaking, what you'll find is that the Western mind today has created the separation between things that should not be separated. So it's like your religion and your devotional acts are one thing, and your intellectual curiosities are a separate thing, and they're not related to each other. Yep. And this is actually a message that you find even among pious Muslim scholars today, that some of them preach this. And what they'll say, for example, is really comes from a lack of understanding or a lack of knowledge due to the inability to access qualified teachers and the lack of information that was available at the time. But what they'll come to you and they'll say that, well, they have this idea that Islam, or what you're studying in your academic pursuits as a scholar in the academy, meaning in Western academia, is one thing, whereas your study of fiqh, your study of aqida, your study of your deen, there's no overlap between the two.
Yeah.
And that's fine for the, for a lot of people. It doesn't really bother them. It doesn't really make a difference for them. But there are a lot of people, and I've come across many, many of them over the past few years, especially through my involvement in Darul Fat and my involvement just, on college, like on the college campus that I went to. What you'll see is that there's a group of people that this really doesn't sit right with them. And it didn't sit right with me.
Yeah.
Because the thing is that what you're essentially saying is that the most important thing to your life, the most important thing, the highest stakes thing is your religion. And your religion is what dictates your afterlife. And as a result of that, one thing that we say is that the sharaf, like the nobility of a knowledge or a subject of inquiry, is directly related to the subject matter that is being discussed.
Correct.
Right? So Aqeedah, for example, is considered to be the most noble of all sciences, because at least one of the subject matters that is studied in Aqeedah is Allah Ta'ala and His messengers, alayhimu salatu wassalam.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is something that we know and we all agree and we all accept. Now, the thing is that the way that it's framed sometimes is, well, do your religion and do your devotional acts, right? And study your Aqeedah, study the 6 pillars of Islam, or 6 pillars of Iman. But then when you want to have real philosophical conversations, we can't really do that within a Muslim paradigm. We just don't have the tools to do it. And so people have, people who I actually very much respect and I consider to be, very smart, logical, intellectual people, they'll come and they'll say, well, the Muslim tradition doesn't have the tools to answer certain questions with respect to metaphysics, with respect to the intellect, with respect to consciousness, with respect to higher order things. So, for example, what is existence? What is, what is the intellect? What are the rational categories? For example, what is impossible? What is necessary? What is, what is contingent? And they say, well, Kalam will only take you so far, but there's a barrier that is reached and you're not really able to, go beyond that barrier.
Can you explain what is Kalam?
So Kalam is, and now this is a very important discussion as well, because it depends on who you ask. And among the ulama, you'll find different definitions. So if you talk to the enemies and the opponents of Kalam, or the ones that, the critics of Kalam, you'll find that they'll say different things. So you'll find that the kind of the most low effort response that you'll hear is from the group of people. They'll just say Kalam is speculative theology, right? And what they mean by that is really an allusion to the ayah of rajman bil ghaib. And they'll use this terminology, right? You go to one of these old school, Salafi, classes, and that's how they refer to ilm al-kalam. And you'll find that even among, this idea is still very present among those who have never studied or opened up a book of ilm al-kalam. And they'll say it's all speculation. And in fact, this can't be further from the truth.
Most fiqh, all of fiqh is speculation too.
We can say that
speculation could be a high level of probability to be correct.
But when it comes to ilm al-kalam, the thing is that the reason why they're saying it's speculative is because what they want to do is draw a distinction. They say, well, we're studying Quran and Sunnah.
Yeah.
And in these books of ilm al-kalam, which we'll touch upon and we'll talk about, they're speculating about things that we have no real way of arriving to the truth about.
Yeah.
And so they're making probabilistic, speculative statements about such and such.
And sometimes it could be absolutely certainly true.
Right. So ilm al-kalam is certainly not speculative theology, right? Because there's very little speculation that's going on. In fact, ilm al-kalam is mainly concerned with dealing with yaqeen, with dealing with certainty. And speculation and certainty are opposites of each other. So ilm al-kalam, one of the definitions of ilm al-kalam is an inquiry into what are the things that we know to the religion by necessity, or rather to prove Allah Ta'ala's attributes, what is necessary, possible, and impossible for Allah Ta'ala, and for his essence, for his attributes, and for his actions, and what is necessary, possible, and impossible with respect to the prophets ﷺ as well, and what they came with, and to prove that with a burhan. A burhan is something that is considered to be certain, meaning not speculative whatsoever, and so building these proofs that are there. So,
question: is it fair to just define ilm al-kalam as the examination of all doctrines by the standard and the law of Islam?
You can say that according to some definitions.
All doctrines, even physics.
Right.
Physics, metaphysical ideas, physical ideas, all philosophical ideas.
Yes.
And then examine them through the lens of Islam.
Yes.
With the intention of guarding ourselves from false beliefs.
Yes.
And removing false ideas, really just guarding ourselves from false beliefs, or refuting falsehoods said about Islam.
So this question is a really important and interesting question. And in fact, this actually is a good, good like segue into, this question that you have. You can say, just for the purpose of we're in a podcast and we have a limited amount of time. So there's a lot of subtlety to this discussion, which is why we have something like the Sanusi tradition. But what is ilm al-kalam, and is kalam, what is it the study of? Well, we can say to some degree that it is the study of everything. And this is something, the subject matter of ilm al-kalam is something that is discussed, and the best research that you can find in the English language on this is actually from one of our teachers, Dr. Abdurrahman Mihrig. And you'll be able to find, he doesn't have much on YouTube, but he has a discussion on the subject matter of the mawdu' of ilm al-kalam, and you can look it up. Alif, if you have time, you could probably just find it on YouTube. He gave a lecture on this. I highly recommend those who are interested in this topic to, to listen to this lecture, because it's very thorough and well researched, and he goes into what the ulama say about this topic. What the greats of Aqida have said, and what were the discussions related to this, both within and without Ahlus Sunnah, meaning the...
I have a question for you. What are the sources of this? Because many people hold that or think that kalam is based upon certain metaphysical assumptions.
Right.
And that those assumptions are derived from the Greeks and are not necessarily true.
Right.
So how do you respond to that?
So the sources of ilm al-kalam are the same sources that we use for knowledge in general. So in fact, there's really no difference between the sources that we use for ilm al-kalam and any other subject of inquiry. With a few exceptions, of course. But for example, in Usul al-Fiqh, and there's a lot of things that I want to touch upon and not enough time to do it. One thing that I just want to bring in this idea is, what do we refer to kalam as? Kalam has many different names. One of the names that we give it is Usul al-Din, the foundations of the religion. Is that the best translation? Probably not. But off the top of my head, you could say Usul al-Din, the foundations of the religion. And this is a really interesting way of describing Aqida. So Aqida, ilm al-kalam, ilm al-tawheed, and Usul al-Din are all considered to be synonymous and referring to the same subject of inquiry. And I want to actually talk, because the Sanusi tradition, which we're going to get into, is not just focused with ilm al-kalam. It's actually broader than ilm al-kalam. So we also have another science that we refer to as Usul al-Fiqh as well. And Usul al-Fiqh is you could say the principles or the foundations of fiqh. In other words, it's a subject of inquiry that goes into the foundational principles or the discussion on the evidences that are considered to be valid evidences with respect to making judgments about the divine law.
So right? Usul al-Fiqh utilizes basic logic.
Right.
Does ilm al-kalam utilize Neoplatonistic ideas?
So the short answer is no. So the idea that I want to bring up is that in Usul al-Fiqh, we all agree on the foundational sources of evidence that we have for Usul al-Fiqh, which is Quran, Sunnah, Ijma', Qiyas, And then we can say a fifth category is what we refer to as juristic reasoning, istidlal. So, for example, you'll find different, discussions on what exactly is istidlal, but things like istihsan, things like amal ahl al-Madina, they can be, actually squared away into this fifth category. But the idea is that there's this agreed upon methodology of where do we derive our fiqh from. And these 5 sources of evidence that we have are actually derived from knowledge itself. From epistemologically speaking, where do we derive knowledge and where do we derive certainty from? We derive it from 3 sources, right? And the first source is, you could say like al-Hawas al-Salima.
Demonstration.
Right? Or you could say essentially the 5 demonstrable senses,
correct,
right? So perception, that, perception based off of something that is tangible and perceivable by the 5 senses that we have.
What you hear, feel, taste, touch.
Exactly. The second one is going to be the nazar, or the basically the contemplation or the induction and deduction, and overall the usage of the intellect in certain ways to arrive to new conclusions based off of certain facts or certain other knowledges. So for example, to take 2 pieces of knowledge that were known to you, but arrange them in such a way to arrive at a new conclusion.
So that's reason.
That's reasoning, right?
Reasoning.
Yeah, reasoning is the best way of putting it.
Yeah.
And the third one is al-khabar al-sadiq, right? The
sound transmission.
Sound transmission. And
Good.
Sound transmission is derived into various categories. So what are those various categories that are there? The first one is what you would refer to as al-khabar al-mutawatir, right? Mass transmission. And the reason on why mass transmission is accepted is because of the fact that it is impossible, beyond, we talk about what is mass transmission. In other words, it is for news to reach you about something that people see, saw, heard, or smelled, or touched, right? Something that they used their own perception to experience. And so many people saw it that it is an impossibility for them to have, conspired against, for a lie.
Yeah.
Now, with respect to the judgment on what that exact thing is, we can, this is a long discussion, so, and a lot of people, they actually misunderstand this because they think it's something that it's not. For example, this comes up, for example, for the question on Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, and what happened to him, with respect to the narrative of the Christians and the Jews after the supposed crucifixion happened. So, for example, we would say without a doubt, there was someone who was crucified at the time of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam.
That looked like him.
That looked like him.
Yeah.
And we know that enough people saw that crucifixion actually happened.
Yeah.
But does that necessarily mean that the people who saw it happen and transmitted the story, is their interpretation of that story correct? Or is there something wrong with that interpretation? That's a discussion that that we for a different time, right? And of course, this is all part of ilm al-Kalam, and this is all discussed in Aqida.
Okay, let me stop right there. Is it factual to say that not only did the early scholars of Kalam not rely upon Greek metaphysical principles as a source, they in fact developed their subject matter to refute a lot of Greek thought?
I mean, this I think is somewhat of a nuanced question, because what we were talking about a little bit earlier was that you have these opponents of ilm al-Kalam, right? So one opponent of ilm al-Kalam, they refer to it as speculative theology, and then you have other critics of ilm al-Kalam, and one group of people, what they'll say is that really the purpose of ilm al-Kalam, and this was an opinion held by certain scholars, including by Imam al-Ghazali, but without of course, that's one opinion that one of the ulama of Ahl Sunnah had, but you find that many of the other ulama actually held a different opinion. And they held that ilm al-Kalam is more useful and more than just a tool to refute, right? And this is very, very important, because this ties into the bigger picture of what is our religion. And what we say is that if we have a religion, what we want to know is what is the foundation of our religion. If one were to say that ilm al-Kalam is solely the purpose of it is to refute heresies and heterodoxies, we actually run into quite a bit of a problem. And the problem that arises is that what about Usul al-Fiqh? When we talk about where does Usul al-Fiqh actually derive its source material from, Usul al-Fiqh actually derives its source material. We say that Usul al-Fiqh, its istimdad, is a few things. The first is the language itself, so inquiry into language itself. And the second one is actually ilm al-Kalam as well. Because if you think about it, you have two principles, or you have two foundations. So the foundation of fiqh is downstream of the foundation of the religion itself. First, you have to prove that the religion exists and that Allah Ta'ala is real and the message that the Prophet ﷺ came with is true and the Quran was preserved and all of these things. And then after that, downstream of that is, well, then what does Allah Ta'ala and His Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam want from us? What do they command us to do and what do they prohibit us from doing? So if we were to say that ilm al-Kalam is just for the purpose of refutation, then we run into a problem, because then what we're saying is that ilm al-Usul, how did it derive if that's the case? Or how was it developed? And one thing that when we talk about when we talk about Usul al-Fiqh, is that the Jumhur, the majority, meaning 3 out of 4 of the madahib, the way that they refer to the inquiry of Usul al-Fiqh is we say that it's ala manhaj al-Mutakallimin, right? That it is on the manhaj or the methodology that was laid down by the ulama of Kalam. So, for example, who are the founders of Usul al-Fiqh? Who are the ones who have done the most when it comes, to the laying down of the principles that are used by the Malikis, by the Hanabila, and the Shafi'is? It is the Mutakallimun. It is people like Imam Abu Bakr al-Baqillani. It's people like Imam al-Haramain, Imam al-Juwayni. It's people like Imam al-Ghazali, Imam al-Razi, and people who preceded them.
Is it fair to say that that tool is simply mantiq, basic logic?
Mantiq has a part to play in it, but it depends on what we mean by mantiq. Mantiq is a very, very important part in the picture of everything. Mm-hmm. But what you find, for example, is that mantiq is not something that was initially part of the study of ilm al-Aqida. And what you find is, and this is something that you'll find that people, they'll kind of talk about and they'll bring up, where mantiq, a lot of the things that we derive in mantiq is actually it's coming from Aristotle. And then they'll say, well, we're on the religion of Aristotle. Well, what about people who preceded the inclusion of mantiq, in like kind of a substantial manner? For example, what about the mutaqaddimun, like Imam al-Ash'ari, for example, or the other a'imma of usul al-din, right, of the foundations of the religion and usul al-fiqh? A lot of them, they weren't concerned necessarily with mantiq, and they had other tools to do the exact same thing that mantiq was doing. Mantiq, at the end of the day, is essentially, it's a tool and it's a language for us to put certain things into words to formalize certain reasoning, but it's something that it doesn't have to come from the Muslims. So, certain things and certain concepts were taken from the Greeks, translated.
Example.
An example would be, the definitions or the division of mantiq, of, formal reasoning and formal logic into the 2 basic categories. The first category is of the tasawwurat, of concepts in and of themselves. And the second one is tasdiqat, which is concepts insofar as how do they relate to each other, and the relationship between those 2 relationships, or between those 2 concepts. For example, when I say something is something else, the sky is blue. So the sky is a concept and blue is a concept, and the idea, the relationship between the 2.
I mean, that sounds like common sense to me. Sounds
like common sense.
But they're just the first to write it down.
Right. And what you find is that, and again, I'm not a historian by any means, nor would I say that I'm a specialist by any means. So people can check me on this. But what you find, for example, is that the Greeks were actually way more concerned with the first category and not the second category. What they were more concerned with was the concept of tasawwurat, right, of concepts, because of the fact that it was part of a larger project of, metaphysics, right? They wanted to know what is the nature of concepts. They wanted to know what is the nature of being and the nature of existence. And this was part of that. What you find is that the ulama of Islam, when it comes to Mantiq, are actually more concerned with the second category, which was not as fleshed out, which is the category of the category of tasawwurat. And the reason on why this was incredibly important for them is because they wanted to generalize a lot of the topics that were being discussed in Usul al-Fiqh when it came to logical reasoning, in qiyas, analogical reasoning. And you see that a lot of development actually happened in the Muslim world with respect to Mantiq that is completely independent and completely different than the development of Greek logic and the development of modern logic that we see today. So it's its own thing. And, you know, you have people who have started a lot of inquiry. This is kind of a dead topic. Again, I'm not an academic. And I know that there's certain academics who are actually watching this right now, and they might be cringing at some of the things that I say. But to the best of my understanding and the best of my ability, what we find is that this is not a topic that's discussed. And it's only in recent years that you find that there's inquiry into Islamic logic, or Arab logic, as sometimes they refer to it, you know, as its own topic of discussion. So, for example, you have, he's non-Muslim, but you have Dr. Khalid Ruwayhib from Harvard University, who discusses, and, you know, he's made essentially his entire career and carved out a niche for himself because of, you know, just talking about the distinction between Arab logic and non-Arab logic, and talking about the unique contributions that are there. So, for example, there's certain modes of inquiry, I won't bore you with the details, that are completely, you know, you don't find them in any discipline of Mantiq or any discipline of formal logic except among the Muslims.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Is it accurate, my understanding of Ilm al-Kalam is that it is no different than Usul al-Fiqh. It uses the sources, but it brings conclusions out using basic logic.
Could be.
Basic fundamental logic.
Right.
And you can even bring these down, boil these down to like 2, 3, 4 principles.
Yes.
Which is like probably not even a quarter into a sulam.
Yes.
And that is essentially all like the rule of non-contradiction. Is anyone going to disagree? The law of identity, that you have to define your terms properly.
Yes.
The limitations of necessary or the importance of accurately extrapolating a necessary implication.
Sure.
Like, for example, I left my shoes outside yesterday. Therefore they must have been dirty. Not necessarily. So lawazim, the implications, the necessary implications. So boil it down to those things. And that ilm al-kalam is essentially the inquiry into all things.
Right.
To bring them into a Islamic framework,
right,
that is in accord with the Quran. And that the ulama of the past used the word ilm al-kalam in 2 different ways. One of them being the erroneous one that the Mu'tazila utilized,
right,
by intaking un-Islamic ideas into their logic.
Could be. But now we're getting into dangerous territory when we say my logic and your logic and their logic. What
I mean by that is like the assumptions.
Right. The assumptions, exactly.
Yeah.
Because logic stays the same.
Is neutral, yeah.
And this is actually something really, really important that I wanted to touch upon.
Yeah.
Because, and I feel like I keep trying to go in that direction, and then something pulls us away from it. When we're talking about the critics of Ilm al-Kalam.
Yeah.
So you have this one group that they say that Ilm al-Kalam is, you know, speculative theology. Let's put them to the side for a second. Now you have
I just wanted to say one more thing. Malik used the word kalam to describe his Shaykh Hurmuz, Ibn Hurmuz, as the defense of the religion.
Right.
So the word has been used in so many different ways.
And
all right, continue.
The second group of critics that you find are ones that are metaphysically interested. And what they will say is that ilm al-kalam is something that can only take you so far, but true knowledge is actually going to come from something other than ilm al-kalam. In other words, what they're saying is that, well, there's a group of people that they say, well, you know, for the regular person, you know, for basically, essentially what they do is that they stratify the world and human beings into three categories. They say you got your lowest category, which is you're totally ignorant, you're juhal, and you're the awam, right? The common, the laity of the people, your farmers and your laborers, and you know, so on and so forth. Those people, don't teach them anything except la ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah, because they can't be trusted with anything else. And you know, like they're just too stupid. They're too stupid to know anything else. So don't even give them anything. The second category is, you know, you got your essentially your like educated class. Your these are the type of people that are your, in this day and age, you can say your lawyers, your doctors, your engineers, people who live in the real world, and people who are, they're educated and they're smart and they ask questions. And well, we can't just leave them with like blind faith, because that's not enough for them. And so what we do is that these people are mid-level intellects. These are the mid-level intellects. Well, we got to give them something. And so ilm al-Kalam is good for them, right? It's enough for them. You know, it's going to basically like pacify them, you know, and it's going to be enough. And then these people, what they do is that they got their third category. And these are for what you refer to as the Khawas. And these Khawas, these are the elite people. And those people are the high level intellects. We are the ones who have the ability, a sole and unique ability, to receive certain truths and certain facts and certain realities that if the secret was let out, you know, there would be, it would cause widespread corruption and chaos in the world, because of the fact that people's, like, you know, their minds and their worldviews and their idea of who God is and who the prophets are would be completely turned upside down. And so this group of people, they say, well, you know, Kalam is not for us, right? That if I'm if you're from the Khawas, you're actually not going to even bother yourself or corrupt your thinking with Kalam, because, well, there's actually something beyond logic. And there's something what they refer to as ma wara al-aql, what is beyond the intellect. And what they say is, well, if you want to, like, you know, really achieve the highest levels of existence and essentially achieve the highest rewards, basically be the most pious Muslim possible, what you're going to do is you're not going to bother yourself and worry about studying in the way that all these other people are studying. You know, probably 80% of the population, you know, you say, okay, leave the school and leave the books alone for the mid-levels and the mid-intellects, right? Let them study Aqidah Tahawiyah. Let them study, you know, the Risala of Ibn Abi Zayd. Let them study al-Barahin and Jawharat al-Tawheed. Don't bother yourself with that. Instead, the way that you're going to reach your level is by virtue of a source of knowledge that is not confined within those three that we talked about the intellect, about the senses, and about, you know, like the al-Khabr al-Sadiq. And that is what we would refer to as ilham. And what they'll say is that, well, if you do certain actions, certain things, then what will happen to you is that you will make yourself receptive, a vessel for certain truths and certain unveilings to be revealed to you. And those are actually going to be what you are guided by.
So this sounds like some source that cannot be verified.
It sounds like a source that cannot be verified. And the thing is that it's a vicious cycle, or a vicious circle, where it's like, because of the fact that they say, well, this stuff is beyond the intellect anyways, what they say is that, well, the claims that we're making cannot be, you know, you can't use logic to refute us, because logic doesn't apply here.
Can't deal with such people.
You can't deal with such people. And the truth of the matter is, now, we don't completely reject this concept of ilham. By the way, I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea. We don't reject this idea, and we don't reject the idea of asrar and unveilings and mukashafats that will show you that Allah Ta'ala can give you as a source. Either it could be a source of guidance and a source like a reward, or a, you know, like what would be like a sharaf that can be given to you.
They say that it yasurruk wa la yaghurruk.
Exactly.
It gives you contentment,
right?
And it gives you happiness. These spiritual unveilings, but it doesn't lead you astray.
And for some people, it can actually be a test that leads them astray. Now, so we accept this idea, and we accept the mukashafat of the awliya. We accept the fact that these things exist, and we accept the fact, and we know this. This is actually proven from the Quran and from the Sunnah, from the lifetime of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We see this, that, for example, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Isra wal Mi'raj, right? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam experienced things, and he conversed with his Lord in a way that we have no idea, and we will never be able to understand. It's something that it's purely known through experience. But now the question becomes, when you're saying this, and you're saying that you have these asrar and these secrets and these unveilings that are there, are they ever in contradiction with what is below it, or what is more primary?
It's not allowed to be contradictory.
Cannot be.
Yeah.
And now what you find is that there are groups of people that are out there that are essentially going to be saying that, you know, once you get to these certain maqamat, and you receive these certain mukashafat, essentially what these unveilings are going to do for you is they do nasakh, they erase what is below it in terms of what the mid-level intellects and the low-level intellects have taught you. And now you got your new set of commands and your new set of orders on how to live life and what to do. And the thing is that there are people that are probably watching this podcast that are like, wait, I don't actually see a problem with that. Like, you know, but it's incredibly problematic.
It's heresy.
It is heresy. And the thing is that this is so problematic, and it's so subversive to the religion, that it essentially what it does is that among Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, it creates this fifth column.
They need to be called out by name.
They need to be called out by name, and I'm willing to do that as well.
Yeah.
I'm not a theologian.
If you can bring us the nas or the text where someone says that,
right,
that an inspiration will override the Sharia,
right,
well, then that's straight up heresy. The people should be shown that clip,
right,
or text or book, and told, don't listen to it.
Right.
Simple as that.
So before we get into that, the thing is that now this is another way of kind of like we have this fifth column, a group of people who are subversive to ilm al-Kalam, and what, you know, it raises a lot of really, really important questions, and it, you know, there's a tension that's there because of the fact that what we find, and this is like a great segue into who is Imam al-Sanusi, and what was his goal, and what was his idea. What was the project that Imam al-Sanusi, was he an individual who was doing this project, or was he carrying on a tradition? Why did we name this program after Imam al-Sanusi?
Yeah.
And what we begin to see is that even among the era of Imam al-Sanusi, so who is Imam al-Sanusi? His name is Imam Muhammad, ibn Muhammad, ibn Yusuf al-Sanusi, rahmatullahi alayhi. He's from the 10th century, or he passed away in the 10th century after Hijrah. He's from Tilmisan, which is an area in Algeria from North Africa. And he's a scholar who was contemporaries with some of the greatest of the ulama of that generation. He studied with, you know, some of the greats. We know who his teachers are. We know his tradition. And we also know his contemporaries and his students. So Imam Muhammad.
What year did he live in?
He lived, again, I'm not the great with dates, but his death date is 895 after Hijrah. So the 9th
895.
century. Yeah. Okay. So he's in the 9th century after Hijrah. So in
Libya.
In Algeria.
Algeria.
Yeah.
Okay.
In Tilmisan. And what we see is that the North Africa, for anyone, you know, who's looking for a subject of inquiry for, you know, a PhD or for in academia, this is something that is there's very little knowledge on this, and it's not very explored.
Yeah.
In North Africa, there is an explosion, a revival of the intellectual tradition, and really essentially a revival of the Islamic sciences that is going on in the 9th, in the 8th and the 9th century. And you find that who is Imam al-Sanusi? Who are his contemporaries? There's a scholar by the name of Ibn Zikri al-Misani, who Imam al-Sanusi actually had. They shared the same teachers, and presumably they were in the same classes. And Ibn Zikri al-Misani, rahmatullahi alayhi, was an incredible scholar as well. Imam al-Sanusi, they had a rivalry, or a professional rivalry, so to speak. And Imam al-Sanusi refuted Ibn Zikriyat al-Misani rahmatullahi alayh at certain times on certain matters as well. Who are his other contemporaries? So they say that Sidi Ahmed Zarruq, the famous Shaykh of Tasawwuf and the Shaykh, the Faqih, they say that he is the Faqih of the Sufiya and the Sufi of the Fuqaha, was one of both his contemporary, and he studied under Imam al-Sanusi.
Oh, he studied under him. Okay.
So Imam al-Sanusi, who is he studying under? He's studying under, essentially, he's living in the era, one generation after one of the greatest of the ulama of the tradition, who a lot of people, he's criminally underrated and unknown, except by the North Africans, who is Imam Ibn Arafa. So Imam Ibn Arafa is one of the great ulama of the tradition from Tunisia. He studied, if I remember off the top of my head, again, I'm not a historian, as you can tell, but Ibn Arafa, rahmatullahi alayh, was someone who studied, if I remember correctly, in the same masjid. He taught in the same masjid. He was considered the Shaykh of the Jama'ah, and he taught in the same masjid that Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani taught.
In Tunisia. Okay.
And, from among the students of Imam Ibn Arafa were people like Al-Wansharisi. Actually, Al-Wansharisi was one generation after that. But the students of Imam Ibn Arafa were some of the greatest of the ulama. They were like the ashab of Imam Malik himself. They were, we see that Ibn Arafa was part of this revival of the Islamic sciences that was there, that was present. And so Imam al-Sanusi is living in this time where there's a revival of both the intellectual tradition and the transmitted tradition as well. There's this interest in hadith, there's this interest in riwayah and dirayah as well, and there's this interest in just all the sciences, and you see that there's this explosion of knowledge that's there.
Now, Ibn Arafa, in his relation to Sanusi, is
his predecessor. His predecessor.
Did he study under him?
No, so not directly.
He didn't meet him.
So they did not meet
Ibn Arafa, then Sanusi, then Zarruq.
Yes.
But there's a gap between Ibn Arafa and Sanusi.
Yes.
He studied with the students of Ibn Arafa.
To the best of my knowledge. Yeah, to the best of my knowledge.
So this is all happening in Tunis, Qarawin.
So this is all happening in North Africa. You see that all throughout the North African region and Egypt as well. Because you see that there's great ulama that are coming out from Egypt as well that are part of this. Not exactly part of the same geographical region. But, subhanAllah, if someone was to look at the 8th and 9th century, you find such incredible scholars that are coming at that time. You find, for example, in Tasawwuf, you find in Fiqh, you find in Aqida, like Imam al-Qarafi is roughly around that same time. Imam Khalil ibn Ishaq al-Jundi, the author of Mukhtasar Khalil, is from that time. Ibn Arafa is from that time. So you find these incredible scholars that are, coming out of that tradition. And, it's a long conversation on why that's happening, and it's worth discussing and thinking about and talking about. So what is happening at the time of Imam al-Sanusi is actually a lot of the questions that we're talking about right now. This idea of a subversive fifth column, so to speak, is developing, and at that time it wasn't as bad as it is today. But there's this, discussion that the ulama are having, and Imam al-Sanusi is at the core of this discussion, is how do we study the Islamic sciences? And at this time, there's this revival of Mantiq. So, for example, you find al-Khunaji or al-Khawanji. I've heard it pronounced in different ways. He's one of the Manatiqa that are there. That there's by Khalid Ruwayhib. He has a book. He has like some papers on al-Khunaji as well, and you find that there's these great ulama that are reviving the tradition. And now one question that arises is that how are we transmitting the tradition, and what are we talking about, and what are we teaching our students? And while all of this is happening, Imam al-Sanusi is noticing that there's a problem among the general population of Muslims as well, where these discussions that we are having have become so intermixed with discussions of philosophy and falsafa, right? Falsafa and philosophy are two separate things, by the way. So philosophy, generally speaking, you can even consider al-Kalam to be philosophy, right? Philosophy is just a study of what would you say? It's like the study of knowledge, or I don't have a great definition off the top of my head.
Well, I used to understand it as the study of reality using the intellect only.
Right.
If we define it as that, then we have to put it aside.
Yeah. But it's not, right? So what we'd say is like, if you're to look up what's the definition of philosophy, we would say it's more general than that. Like, just off the top of my head, like you could just say it's like the study of higher order things. Maybe we could just leave it at that.
Or the systematic study of anything.
Right.
Because I could have a philosophy for a sports game plan.
Exactly. Because when you say philosophy of religion, philosophy of science, philosophy of mathematics, philosophy of history.
The systematic examination of anything.
Right. So but now when we talk about falsafa, we're talking about a certain tradition that has arisen, which is, the tradition of Ibn Sina. And there's a lot of different key,
put it in the garbage.
Like people that are there that are, discussing this. And in the books of the ulama as well, there are, there's a lot of philosophy that has entered into their books, some of it out of necessity and some of it without any, no necessary reason. So Imam al-Sanusi is saying that, well, when we look at the tradition and when we look at how we're transmitting it, we have, to some degree, he's a mujaddid, right? Without a doubt, Imam al-Sanusi was the mujaddid of his time, of his area. Imam al-Sanusi says, well, what we need to do is that we need to revive the study of Aqida, because no one can be left behind. When it comes to, no one will be excused on the Day of Judgment from saying that they believed in Allah and His Prophet without having a reason. And the reason can be anything, by the way. The reason is not like a proof, like a burhan, like a logical reasoning where premise 1, premise 2, therefore, and so on and so forth. No, it could be more general than that. But there are people at the time of Imam al-Sanusi that are completely, totally ignorant, right? That are completely unaware, and they're only believing in Allah and His Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why? Because it's just the religion of the time, and they don't even know what that means. They don't know who is Allah. So you have, really like comical examples of statements where, there's like a story of, two women, and, some person dies or something like this. This is, I'm paraphrasing, but this is just, to illustrate an example. Some woman dies, some man dies, and there are two women that are talking about them. And one of the women says, I ask that, like she makes dua, and she says, oh Allah, forgive this person, or something to that effect. And then the next woman who's next to her, she says something along the lines, she says, I make, oh creator of God, or oh creator of Allah, forgive this person. Meaning, so I ask the creator of the creator to forgive this person. And that just shows you the lack of knowledge and the lack of understanding that the laity have. And this might seem like we're far away from this time. How many Muslims can you find in America where you ask them, they say, I'm Muslim. And you say, why are you Muslim? They say, oh, my dad was Muslim. And then you say, so what does that mean? And they say, I don't know. I literally don't know. I just know I call myself Muslim, but I don't know anything beyond that, right? Maybe I know the actions of what Muslims do, but not even like a single thing can they tell you about the religion itself, let alone their beliefs and whatnot. So you see that Imam al-Sanusi, during his era, he says what we need to do is we need to simplify things and create a curriculum for students who, for the regular person, not even, not just for the specialist, but what we need to do is that we need to create a curriculum and go back to the modes and the subject of inquiry that the Mutakaddimun of the, meaning the predecessors, the first scholars of Aqida were interested in, and the way that they taught. And, you see that there's other ulama as well that, talk about this, of going back to the Mutakaddimun, of going back to these original, to the original modes of inquiry. Ibn Khaldun is a perfect example of someone who strongly supported this. And, this is yet another discussion, that is worth a couple of hours to discuss and to talk about as well. But what he does is that he lays out a curriculum over his entire lifetime where what we refer to as the Sanusiyyat. And initially, Imam al-Sanusi, he writes a large book. The formal title of the book is escaping me right now, but colloquially we refer to it as al-Kubra, right? The large book. It's his Aqida, al-Aqidat al-Kubra. It is his large book of Aqida, and it's not actually that large. It's maybe 50 to 60 pages. I think I brought it with me just for the purpose. No, I didn't bring it with me. But it's like, it's somewhere here in the library, actually.
We have it here?
It's not a large book, and so he writes it with certain goals in mind, and it is an incredibly blessed book, and it's a book that becomes very well known and studied within his own lifetime. but he wants to refine it further and to simplify it further. So he writes a book that later comes to be known. All of them have formal titles, but they, colloquially became known by, these. And this is just kind of what people remember is al-Wusta, al-Aqida al-Wusta, the middle book. And this is a book, it's around 30 pages or so if you count them. And it is a refinement of his previous book, where he reduces it and, takes out what is what he considers to be less important or less necessary, reorganizes things. If you repeat something at multiple times, then he, only mentions it once and makes it more systematic. Then the third book that he writes, and this is the one that really, really changes the paradigm among the awam, among the regular Muslims, is the book that we refer to as al-Barahin, or it's also known as as-Sughra. And as-Sughra is a refinement of the creed to a level that anyone, and you can actually find this book and find translations on it. So I translated it. There's many translations. You could go on sharhapp.com and find my translation, although there's many translations of it as well. It's called Barahin. And it's a refinement.
Can we bring it here? It's here, right? It's here. We probably have like 10 copies here, right?
So it's maybe 10, 12, pages in total. And he writes Barahin. And it's something that it's probably one of the most commentated and taught book in the Islamic tradition until today. Until today, any corner of the world that you go to, where there's, Sunni Muslims that are teaching, you will find that the book is being discussed. And there are dozens and dozens, in fact, hundreds of commentaries and super commentaries, marginal glosses that have been written on this book because of how important it becomes. So that book, as-Sughra, is, referred to as al-Barahin, and it's like a starting point for the student of knowledge. But even that is not enough for Imam al-Sanusi. So he writes another book, al-Sughra.
That's 4 books.
Yeah, 4 books so far. The shortening of the shortening, or the shortening of the short book, you could say. Or, the smaller of the smaller. So Sughra was actually written because one of his students, Imam al-Sanusi's students, he used to bring his father to classes, to the durus, and his father eventually becomes too old to come to classes, but his father still wants to learn. So what does Imam al-Sanusi do? His father complains to Imam al-Sanusi. He writes him a letter asking him for forgiveness for not coming to his classes anymore. Imam al-Sanusi realizes, well, there's an entire group of people that are just unable to spend time in the masjid, actually. They're not able to come. And so you find that Imam al-Sanusi writes in correspondence, he writes Sughra. He writes this smaller and even more refined and even more summarized creed, and he sends it as a letter to the father of the student. And by the way, as a side point, this shows you that there is a huge precedence and a huge utility that the original ulama saw for teaching by way of correspondence.
SubhanAllah.
Right? That and online, if at that time, Imam al-Sanusi, and keep in mind, this is Aqida, that is being taught here. It's literally Aqida that's being taught. It is the most important and the most critical of sciences. And Imam al-Sanusi sees that there's a need to teach people by way of correspondence. So, if by letters, and words can be misinterpreted, books are misinterpreted all the time. What then of online learning, right? Where you can actually talk to your teacher. You see their facial expressions. You can clarify and stop them on the spot and say, hey, excuse me, I don't understand something. And you can text them in your group chats, right? In the past, the only means of communication that they had were these rasa'il, these, letters that they would send out. And so much of our Sharia and so much of our intellectual tradition is actually contained in these letters, right? Letters that we have, from Imam Shafi'i to his students, letters that we have from Imam Malik to his students, letters that we have, from, all of the Imam. This is just how they, corresponded. So without a doubt, if the Imams of the tradition were alive today, people like Imam al-Ash'ari, people like Imam al-Maturidi, without a doubt, they would be online. I have no doubt in my mind about this, that they would be online because of the platform. And this is great. It's a great people. And it's a great plug, right, for ArcView. And, we've talked...
put the ArcView thing here.
And we've talked to the ulama about this, the utility of ArcView, or the utility of online learning. And, we asked our teacher, Shaykh Ahmed al-Maghili, Hafidhahullah, one of the great ulama of Algeria. And we've talked to many, many of the other ulama as well about this. And is it knowledge? Are you learning when you're learning online? And he said, without a doubt, it's knowledge, 100%. Right? Of course, being in person is better. Yeah, exactly. With their certainty of transmission, there's the ability to speak to someone. But without a doubt, it is knowledge and it is a way of learning and is something that everyone should be taking advantage of. But to get back to the point that, we were talking about, Imam Sanusi, he writes this, Sughra, and then he writes an even smaller one, which it's meant for the least educated and the youngest person in society. He calls it al-Hafida. Al-Hafida means literally, it means the granddaughter.
Sughra.
Which is, no, we would actually say it's Sughra.
So now we're on book number 6.
So it's a tradition of 6 books, or it's like a series of 6 books that he writes, and then he goes back along the way, and he also writes commentaries on these books, and then he writes a primer to al-Barahin called al-Muqaddimat. Now, Imam Sanusi what is he concerned with? And what you find is that in the books that he's writing, he actually issues a warning for students in the beginning of their studies, and he says to students, he says, and the student should be forewarned about the studying of certain books because of the fact that those scholars, they intermixed with their writing certain like certain discussions related to philosophy that confuse the mind and lead a person astray.
Yeah.
And they don't differentiate between what is correct and what is incorrect. And so the student should be forewarned from them. Now, what Imam Sanusi is not doing here, and a lot of people misunderstand this, Imam Sanusi is not saying don't study these books and don't read them. In fact, we should be reading them. And they're incredible resources. Certain books like the books of Imam al-Razi are certain books that we should be reading and benefiting from. But the point still stands that at the beginning of one's journey, there needs to be a distinction between falsafa and aqida. And what that doesn't mean, though, is that we are separating between religious knowledge and secular knowledge, or metaphysics. Yeah. Muslims are incredibly metaphysically interested. And this is independent of the Greeks. This is independent of, other influences that are upon the Muslims.
What is metaphysics?
Metaphysics, that's a great question. That's probably, a long discussion. But what we can say, with, is like metaphysics, you can perhaps say it's the study of existences or the study of something to that effect. The
study of what is not physical?
You can say that. What is not physical, but I think that's too general of a definition.
Yeah.
But my idea here is that from academia, from the West, you find that the normative tradition is under attack. And what they'll say, for example, is that, well, the Mutakallimun, this is yet another criticism, is that, well, the Mutakallimun, so we have 3 criticisms so far. Criticism number 1, Kalam and Aqida, the way that you guys, right, when they say you guys, what they really mean is the Sufi, Ash'ari, Madhabi, whatever you want to call it, right? The way that you guys study, it's speculative theology. That's one. The second one is that Kalam and Aqida, the way that you guys study Aqida is not going to actually get you to certain truths, and it's not going to get you.
Limited.
Yeah, it's limited. And the third one now is that, well, Aqida, or the way that Muslims in general, the way that they study, is not interested in anything beyond theology, and they're not interested in higher level questions with respect to metaphysics, with respect to epistemology, with respect to ontology, with respect to existence in general, and with respect to all of these topics that you would say that, when like the topics that are discussed in general terms, the uqala, right? People, who talk and, are like intellectual, right? Not a great, translation of uqala, but you find it's like people who are willing to have these discussions. So the Mu'tazila, the Falasifa, today, perhaps you could say some of them are not, but others you could say, like, for example, people in philosophy departments. Yeah. You could say that they're the uqala. People in the,
just like general thinkers.
Right, exactly, thinkers. And then we could probably say that the people who are in the Islamic studies departments, they're the sufaha, right?
Yeah. Well, who decides what's high level?
Well, it kind of depends. It's not really a perfect, but what I mean to say by that is that there's certain people that are willing to have discussions, right? Like why I'm saying that, people in these Islamic studies departments, the reason why they're going in is just for the purpose of destroying Islam. Yeah. But there are people that are out there, who are just focused on just talking about these discussions. Yeah. And what the academy essentially wants to do is they want to sideline and they want to basically sequester Muslim thought from having broader discussions with people who are not Muslims in a non-polemic way, just talking about important topics that human beings are just interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And this cannot be further from the truth. Because, for example, Muslims have so much to offer with respect to things that are just relevant to everyone on a daily basis or on a philosophical basis. So Aqeedah is not, solely focused. We're answering the most important questions. What the sole purpose of Aqeedah, the number one, purpose of Aqeedah, is to answer the question of how do we know that Allah Ta'ala exists? What is obligatory upon us to know? But now bringing and tying this back to the sharaf of a knowledge, the nobility of a knowledge. If you're talking about Allah Ta'ala and you're talking about his attributes, don't you think that along the way of when you're proving this and when you're discussing this, along the way, you are also going to learn and unveil things about the nature of existence and lower level things as well? Meaning that along the way, you are going to be learning about everything, right? Because when you talk about Allah Ta'ala's attributes, when you talk about human beings, when you talk about existence, right, you're also going to be, opening up subjects and modes of inquiry that were previously, that were not necessarily related to, what do we believe in on an immediate basis, but what are the underpinnings of the way that we think? What are the underpinnings of knowledge itself? So on and so forth. So,
this we could say falls under the category of contemplation.
Right.
The Quranic command to contemplate.
Exactly. You could definitely say that.
Yeah.
And so you find that Muslims have a lot to offer. We talked previously about what is considered Arabic logic. I don't know if that's great, but that's what they call it. I don't think that's very fair or accurate, but they call it Arabic logic. There's people who are writing, and doing research and, talking about this.
Yeah.
That what do the Muslims contribute to the field of logic? For example, we have something called al-Muwajjahat, right? That where Muslims are solving really interesting philosophical problems and, logical problems that they're novel solutions. And Muslims have been talking about these things for many, many, many years, centuries. When it comes to certain theories or certain concepts, mental models, of certain things, Muslims are at the forefront. When it comes to, Muslims, we have this concept of what we call ahwal, right? Not the Sufi hal.
Yeah.
But ahwal, we have something called ahwal theory, right? Of, dividing attributes into abstract attributes and into what would you call it? Like attributes of meaning.
Yeah.
And abstract attributes, these ahwal, is something that you don't find anyone else talking about. You don't find, this is something that is completely, and it is independent. It is independent of the Greeks.
So this sounds like contemplations.
It does.
Contemplations of the khalq.
Exactly.
And then categorizing it, systematizing it, trying to understand it.
Right.
And in medicine, the same. Biology happens the same thing.
Right. And ultimately, the reason on why this is done is for the purpose of finding the truth. Right. What we're concerned with is finding the truth. And now we've only talked about Aqeedah. We actually haven't even talked or touched upon all of the other contributions that Muslims have. For example, in Usul al-Fiqh. Usul al-Fiqh in and of itself is such an understudied and misunderstood science because people think that by studying Usul al-Fiqh, what you're really just going to be getting is like kind of like you're peeling back how do the madhabs work, and that is one part of it. But Usul al-Fiqh is an inquiry into how do we know things and how do we prove things, and how do we understand and break down logic, how do we understand language, how do we understand reasoning, how do we understand evidences and how to weigh them together, and how do we, all of these different things, and even, what is a command, what is a prohibition. What is governance? Exactly.
Can I answer a question from the audience?
Sure.
Someone's asking that on al-Sanusi's, on the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, يقول وطريق السلف في المتشابهات. The way of the pious predecessors regarding what is mutashabih. The verses, Ibn Qudama lists the mutashabihat being al-istiwa wal-nuzul wal-yad. أنهم ينزهون الله تعالى عن المستحيل في حقه. They negate from Allah Ta'ala what is incompatible with the definition of God. من الجسمية, right? Of having a jism, of having a body. ويفوضون العلم بمراده فيها إليه. And then they return the meaning to Allah. مع الإيمان بها على ما أراده الله. While believing it means what Allah entails. I mean, this is almost no different than Ibn Qudama's treatment of it, where the ithbat is, as Ibn Qudama says, ithbatul lafd. I'm just doing a comparative theology here, because here he's the Sanusi books, and then you want to, the question is probably asking in relation to someone like Ibn Qudama. Ibn Qudama's ithbat is ithbat al-lafd. So just answering that question before we move on. Okay. Let's see what else. وَكُلُّ مَا وَرَدَ فِي الْكِتَابِ, everything that comes in the book and the sunnah, مِمَّا يُوهِمُ ظَاهِرُهُ الْجِسْمِيَّةِ, what a person would interpret from that meaning as God having a body. All right. من اليد والوجه والاستواء والجهة فإنه يجب قطعا اعتقاد استحالة ذلك. Okay. Then you would know that that is not the case, that the jismiyah, the having being made of material. لقوله ليس كمثله شيء. All right, continue. I just wanted to answer that question before time ran out.
Right.
Yeah.
So what were we speaking about? Usul al-Fiqh. And then we have these other, so Usul al-Fiqh is interested, and it solves a lot of problems, you can say. And there's a lot of interdisciplinary work. Usul al-Fiqh is basically the place where interdisciplinary work happens. Because what the scholars of Usul, what they'll do at times is that they'll say, well, we have this concept, and just as an example, I don't know if this specifically happens, but they'll say, let's say we have this concept. The Manatiqa, the scholars of Mantiq, refer to this concept, and they have like a model of it like this, and then the Fuqaha have a model of this concept like this. Who is correct in the matter, right? What interpretation or what understanding is correct, and why is it correct? And this happens. Or for example, what they'll do is that they'll talk so this happens all over the place, where they'll put two groups together and they'll say, what is, a shared concept? Like, so there's certain concepts that are shared across different disciplines. So a concept that is shared across 4 or 5 different disciplines would be the concept of of what is a proposition. Okay. So I'll give an example. In Usul al-Fiqh, what we refer to, or let's start with fiqh actually. So in fiqh, when we say something is a hukum, it is ithbatu amrin li amr, right? So a hukum, for example, is when we say something is something else. Yeah. Right. And so what are you doing? You're saying, for example, and they have a specific, scope to that, but they'll say, for example, salah is wajib, right? Okay. And what they refer to this construction, this concept of saying one thing and deeming it or judging it with this other thing, they say it is called a hukum. Hukum. Right? Then the Manatiqa, right, the scholars of Mantiq have this exact same concept. What do they refer it to as? For example, the sky is blue. They refer to it as the mawdu' and the mahmud, right? The subject and the predicate. The scholars of Nahu, right, they have the exact same concept. What is it? It's the mubtada and the khabar, right? The what you could say the mubtada and the khabar. In English, we'd actually still translate it as like the subject and the predicate. What would the first group say? So the first group, the fuqaha, they say it's a hukum. Hukum. The second group, they refer to it as the mawdu' and the mahmud. And the third, the grammarians. And the grammarians, they refer to it as the mubtada and the khabar. And then you have the ulama of balagha. Yeah. What do they refer it to as? The musnad ilayh. Correct. 4 different groups that we're able, and then the Mutakallimun as well, or the ulama of Aqida, they also refer to they refer to it as a hukum as well, or among other things. You could also refer to it as a qadiyya. There's other things. Now the question becomes, well, there needs to be a space where all what are they all contributing to this discussion? And so what Usul al-Fiqh at times is doing, and an incredible book for this that you can find is al-Bahr al-Muhit by Imam al-Zarkashi. Among the other, like pretty much every book of Usul al-Fiqh is going to be doing this. Al-Bahr al-Muhit is just I think anyone who reads that and uses it, it's like an encyclopedic work. It's a lexicon. Yeah. And al-Bahr al-Muhit, no, that's a different al-Bahr al-Muhit. So that's a lexicon. So al-Bahr al-Muhit by Imam al-Zarkashi is a book in Usul al-Fiqh It's like 6 volumes, and I think it's printed in more volumes.
On what
on
subject?
Usul al-Fiqh.
Ooh.
And he's doing this, right? He's doing this all, for example, one of the most beneficial discussions that I've been able to find on the like concept, what is a concept? What is a definition? A ta'rif is actually not even in, this is discussed in Mantiq, but the most beneficial discussion that I've found on this is actually in al-Bahr al-Mahit, in Usul al-Fiqh, on what is a concept and what is a definition. Because why? The Usulis are concerned with discussions or with definitions, because it comes up all the time. And so what Imam Zarkashi and the Usuliyun in general, what they'll do is that they'll say, well, the Manatiqa, people like Ibn Sina, for example, they define a discussion in such and such way. Whereas other people, they define a discussion, they define a definition in such and such way. Who is correct about it, and what do we actually care about? Long story short, there's so much. So we're on the third group of critics about really our tradition, right? The Sanusi tradition is, generally speaking, it's our tradition, is that Muslims are not metaphysically interested, and they're not interested in having intellectual discussions. They're not interested in anything beyond, just their own internal discussions. And what this actually reminds me of is there's a story, it's a well-known story and an incident that actually occurred with Malcolm X, right? Where there's, a guy from the Nation of Islam, he gets beat up or something like that. And this is in like the Spike Lee movie as well, right? This is like a turning point for Malcolm in the movie. He gets beat up and he gets sent to the hospital, or I think he was someone who was not from the Nation of Islam, if I remember correctly. That actually makes more sense in the story. This just came to mind. And, he's a black man and he gets beat up, and people say, well, you Muslims, he's referring to the Nation of Islam, not actual, Sunni Muslims, but they're saying, oh, you guys are only concerned with yourself.
Yeah.
And Malcolm realizes, well, we need to have solidarity with these other groups and whatnot. And you Muslims only care about yourselves, right? And you'll only mobilize when you care about yourselves.
Yeah.
And you're not interested in like branching out.
Yeah.
You're not interested in broader.
You're an insular group.
Exactly. And so, what does Malcolm do? There's a show of strength that he has, and, it changes a lot for him, and it's like a pivotal moment. This is something that Muslims should actually be thinking about in a very deep way. We're not just solely concerned if we limit our discussions about Aqida, our discussions about fiqh, our discussions about jurisprudence in general, legal theory, all these different things. If we are simply focused on the Aqida wars that we have amongst ourselves and refuting one and another, and we're not doing work to equip our youth to be able to answer broader questions in general, right? Outside of the polemics, we're doing them a disservice, because Islam has something incredible to offer. How would it not? It's nur upon nur, right? It's light upon light, because we have the light of the intellect. That's, it's a light that has been given, right? Our fu'ad is this light that allows us to see and to distinguish wrong from right. And then beyond that, it's like the Muslims have a cheat code, which is that they also have the divine light and, divine guidance as well. Yeah. And so we have these guardrails that have been set where there are certain, like things that we wouldn't be able to know except with the guidance of Allah Ta'ala and from the guidance that the Prophet ﷺ gave us. And then, what that allows us to actually do is that when it comes to matters of the physical world, we have an edge upon everyone else, because there are groups of people who are unable to even question and unable to even, get beyond the question of, where did the universe even come from? Can it come out of nothing, or can it not come out of nothing? For us, it's something that we already know the answer. And so a lot of times we just have to work our way backwards to figure out what, of course we know that
that's
the universe.
What we end up doing.
Exactly.
We end up actually, and that's the best way to understand things, is you have to work your way backwards.
Right.
And that's what a Mutakallim does. Right. He already knows the truth.
Right.
Now there's a space of inquiry, and he engages in the inquiry alongside with this most important piece of information.
Right. And, and they do that. But, one thing that I also want to mention is that the Mutakallimun are also, so, in academia, you'll find that they draw a distinction between philosophy and theology. And they say theology is one thing and then philosophy is one thing. And really the difference is that they're really concerned with the same subject matter, if you think about it, which is, higher truths.
Yeah.
But what they say is that philosophy is the philosopher goes in and they are unbiased and they don't know what the answer is before they enter into it. Whereas the theologian already has the answer and now they're working their way backwards and, using polemics. When in reality, this cannot be further from the truth. Both because, first of all, philosophers never do that. Yeah. And the falasifa and people who, attribute themselves to being the more philosophically minded Muslims, they don't do that either, right? They got their own preconceived notions. And they basically just work their way backwards as well.
That's true. But they have an atheist conclusion.
Right.
In some cases.
Yes.
But a religious thinker, what he's saying is that through transmission, we know that these are facts.
Right.
That are to be brought into the equation. Right. That's the idea.
And generally what I've found is that I have not found a more open-minded, so, for lack of a better word, group of thinkers than the Mutakallimun.
Yeah.
The Mutakallimun are willing to entertain every single possibility that is there. And what they do is that the way that a doctor runs a differential diagnosis and they rule out things by other things, right, by certain pieces of evidence, the Mutakallimun are using what you would refer to as differential diagnosis and ruling out possibilities that are absurd and logically impossible.
Exactly. Yeah.
So now let's kind of, I guess, tie it together, which is the Sanusi tradition. What we wanted to do with the Sanusi tradition, what I began to see is that there's a need that needs to be fulfilled. Which is, and you see this in person, which is part of our project for Darul Fath, but you also see this online. Generally speaking, for Darul Fath, it's actually, a very different environment. When we interact with the Darul Fath students, we find that some of them, are incredibly talented and they're incredibly smart. But because of the fact that they're like in person, you could actually cure a lot of the issues that they might have when it comes to philosophy and theology and when it comes to certain questions and certain crises that they might be going through just by virtue of in person, right? There are people that come to the Darul Fath teachers and they're having, a crisis. Some of them have even in the past had like a crisis of faith or an existential crisis. And they come to the teachers and, the teachers, because they can see and interact with that type of person, they're able to just say, just don't worry about it, keep coming and do this wird, for example, and this is just something that will pass.
Correct.
And it passes because you're dealing with normal human beings. Now in the online world, there are so many people across, like, for example, the viewers of this podcast, they don't have access to a circle of knowledge. And as a result of that, when you don't have a scholar in front of you, or you don't have someone who is connected to the Sharia directly with an unbroken chain, with this chain of narration, you can't just tell them, hey, just don't worry about it, it's going to go away. Yeah. Because, and especially those who are philosophically and theologically minded, they are people that they need to have more of a guidance and more of a system, and they need training as well to be able to answer these questions as they come across them. What I began to see is that there are, there's no such program that is out there that is answering this from a Sunni-minded tradition, from people who are properly trained in the Sharia, who actually believe in the veracity and the importance of the Sharia and actually respect scholars and respect the tradition that they are teaching. And so what you find is that, this group, this fifth column that is there, you'll find that they attribute themselves to Islam and they attribute themselves, to being Sunni, but there's certain people, for example, I guess it's probably not the best idea to name them by name, right? Even though I kind of wanted to, but there are people, they attribute themselves, the first and foremost on that list are the followers of Ibn Arabi. And really, I'm probably going to make a lot of people upset, but Ibn Arabi himself, without a doubt, actually.
That he did what?
That, that he created a subversive tradition within the tradition itself. They call it the Akbari tradition. And this is, without a doubt, it's a subversive tradition, and it's not a Sunni tradition. And, this is actually incredibly clear, by the way, for anyone who wants to inquire about this. You can read the books yourself and you can see that this is a tradition that they don't do enough, and they you know, in the past, a lot of what was being taught and what was preached was actually hidden, right? It was not mentioned. And you know, there was so many of the ulama, they were hearing word about who Ibn Arabi was, not necessarily by reading his books, but by hearing who he was from the biographies of others, or for example, reading his books from people who transcribed his books, from scribes. Keep in mind, these manuscripts were rare, and Ibn Arabi's books specifically were not mass printed and mass produced. So you have people like Imam al-Suyuti, like Imam al-Sha'rani, you know, ala ra'sina, you know, like without a doubt, they are the giants of the tradition. And they're reading the books of Ibn Arabi, and there's incredible spiritual benefits that you can say can be derived by certain things that they're reading. But then there's also certain, you know, they're reading these books and they come across these passages and they're just flabbergasted, completely in shock by the stuff that they're reading. Keep in mind, these are handwritten manuscripts. And, you know, like it would cost you the equivalent of thousands of dollars for just one folio of manuscripts. You had to be incredibly rich at that time to be a scholar who had a large library. And, you know, they're completely shocked, and they're just left scratching their heads, and they're like, this can't be the case, right? This person who we're deriving benefit from, and, you know, it seems as if he's experiencing certain things that we ourselves have experienced, right? These are ulama of tasawwuf, like Imam al-Sha'rani, or like, you know, Imam al-Suyuti, right? I think Imam al-Suyuti is a great example because, you know, there's ijma' among the believers and among the Muslims that Imam al-Suyuti was an imam, and he was a mujtahid, and he had mastered the sciences of the Sharia, both the inward and the outward. And so you find that people like Imam al-Suyuti, they're left and they're like, you know, this can't be the same person. This person who is writing this stuff over here cannot be the same stuff who is writing this stuff over here. And what, you know, a lot of these scholars who they wrote up, you know, they praise Ibn Arabi, what they are forced to say that it's two different authors that are there. That, you know, Ibn Arabi, you know, this stuff that we're reading, it must be a forgery, or you know, in certain points you can do ta'wil. You could say, well, we you know, yes, the outward is kufr. Literally, the outward is kufr. And we can, you know, but we, like, you can charitably interpret this, and you can understand that there's an interpretation that is not kufr, so we take that. But there are certain passages that you find among the works of Ibn Arabi that are just simply not justifiable. And they say that these must be forgeries, and they must be things that were placed in there by his enemies. And, you know, or by people with unscrupulous beliefs, or, you know, so on and so forth. And so when this, you know, happens, you know, at that time, this could be an excuse. But in this time, for example, we have handwritten transcripts from Ibn Arabi himself, right? We, you know, these are manuscripts that are available and that are accessible for anyone to see. And we know for a fact that indeed Ibn Arabi did say the things that people said there's no way that he couldn't have said. And let's leave him for a second. And let's talk about the followers of Ibn Arabi as well, you know, who we refer to now as Akbari. When you see that you could just read the type of theology, ask them straight up, do you believe in the same Aqida that Imam Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari, the Imam of Ahl Sunnah, do you believe in that same theology, or do you think that Imam al-Ash'ari was wrong on certain things? And they'll you know, dodge the question, and what they'll do is that they'll say, well, even the A'imma that followed Imam al-Ash'ari, like Imam al-Razi and Imam al-Ghazali and, you know, Imam al-Juwayni, even they disagreed with Imam al-Ash'ari, so it's not a big deal for us to disagree. You know, they disagreed with him, and we're actually perfectly fine with that. But is the nature and the quality of your disagreements with Imam al-Ash'ari the same as the nature of the disagreements that Fakhruddin al-Razi and Imam al-Ghazali and Imam al-Juwayni had with Imam al-Ash'ari? Or is it a qualitative difference? Is it a different Aqida altogether? And the truth of the matter is that it is a completely different Aqida, without a doubt. Because, for example, their entire concept of what exists and what is real is different. And there are certain people that have gone on to say that quiet part out loud, right? That it is completely different. And that we believe that, you know, we, the followers of Ibn Arabi, actually believe in something that is completely different. That our Aqida, you know, this is for the mid-level intellect, and the stuff that we actually believe in is completely different.
Example.
So, for example, you know, there's a clip where there is, an interview from a famous, like YouTube channel. He's interviewing, one of the chief proponents of this theology. And what does he say in that clip? He says, that, and in fact, we are Allah, right?
What?
So I'm okay with playing it. If it depends. I mean, if you want the heat or
that's
not.
like insane. A Muslim can't say that.
So
there's no way a Muslim says that.
So
is he? How could that possibly
if you
be?
Can, pull that up. Yeah, I sent it to you on Telegram. Do you want me to on something else? Okay, let me see if I can. Anything else? Sure. And I know I'm going to get a lot of heat for this, right? But the thing is that this is nothing but facts.
Well, you have here this one on the stream, and you have al-Fakhr al-Razi taqdim al-Aqli ala al-Naqli in the chat going crazy. The summary of what al-Fakhr al-Razi says is where that we don't accept contradictions. So if one text says one thing, another text says the other thing, okay, an opposite thing, then you don't accept a contradiction. You make tafweed.
Right.
That's it. It's not saying that if we don't like an idea because it doesn't suit our mind, we reject Allah's attribute. No, we reject the meaning that contradicts the other text. All right.
But there are people, so let's put it this way. There are people that propose and purport that like the only existence that truly exists is Allah.
Yeah.
And our existence, meaning our tangible corporal existence, what is the locus of it? It is God's knowledge. And what that essentially means is that we reside in Allah. That is essentially what it boils down to. We don't believe this, right? We don't believe. In other words, what we're saying is that we are inside of Allah, and Allah is the only real existence.
No, that's an absurdity.
This is an absurdity, right?
Yeah, that's an absurdity.
And the thing is that we can prove this completely. Now just a person with any amount of intellect, right, can prove that it's not the case. Why? I could use just those, my intellect and my senses. I could say, I'm here. I'm separate from you. You're separate from me. And we are not God, right? Well, and we have separate existences. And therefore, God is separate from us. God is not us. Right?
Well, that's also like a reverse hulul.
Exactly. It is a reverse hulul.
Both hululs are,
right.
Both hululs are kufr in our theology. Either Allah being in his creation, or us being inside of Allah. All that's kufr.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is an example. And, you can find, for example, if you were to read Fusus al-Hikam by Ibn Arabi, it's essentially what you'll see is that there's a refutation of the Ash'ira and of, and when we say the Ash'ira, it's not like a loaded word. When we say Ash'ira, keep in mind that the context that Ibn Arabi is coming from, Ash'ari is synonymous with Sunni, right? Yeah. And when we say Ash'ari, what we mean by that is Ash'ari, Maturidi, and Hanbali as well, right? So we're not just singling out the Ash'ira, but what we're saying is that it's a subversion of the tradition, and it's a subversion of very core and key concepts of what we accept to be real and what we accept to be the truth. So now where does this problem arise? Where this arises is that the academy, meaning Western academia, and people who are kind of drawn, like you could find them all over Twitter, are incredibly drawn towards Ibn Arabi and towards like this philosophical Islam that's there. Yeah. And there's so many concepts, and the proponents of Ibn Arabi, the Akbaris, especially the ones that speak English today, will actually be very open. They'll say that we're Neoplatonists. We are like, meaning that they believe in the theory of Plato, and they believe in, the Greek philosopher, and they say, well, we take those ideas and we repurpose them to kind of suit our concept and our idea. Of like, and what they'll do is that they'll actually repurpose certain things. Like, Plato had this idea of the 10 intellects and this thing that we call emanation theory. And it's really a word game. But what they'll do, for example, is that they'll say, well, in like Greek philosophy, they have these ideas of these celestial forms. And in Islam, we have these ideas of the arsh and the kursi and the sama ad-dunya and these different types of things. And they'll actually map these concepts one-to-one onto Plato's ideas of how the world works.
Yeah, they just nabbed it. Even this alam al-mithal is just a crate nab from
right, exactly, from Plato's forms.
Yeah,
exactly. And
I have to go in about 5 minutes, but you can continue, by the way. You and Omar at the stream after me.
Right.
But if you have, before I leave, I want to just answer this mas'ala on al-Razi. But you want to continue with yours, or you want to continue after I go?
I think we can actually wrap up because, so let's talk about what exactly is the Sanusi tradition.
Yeah.
The idea behind the Sanusi tradition is that we wanted to answer all three of these concepts, or all three of these objections, right? Yeah. Because the truth of the matter is that we are being bombarded from all sides, from criticism about what our tradition is, and it leaves people incredibly confused about what is Sunni Islam. And we need to show people, and we need to train a group of scholars and a group of people who are accomplished in their other fields about what is it, what does it mean to be Muslim? What does it mean to, what is the philosophical side of Islam? And refer to the entire discussion for what I mean by philosophical side of Islam, right? So what the Sanusi tradition does is that we wanted to fulfill this need and to offer a type of programming that is more rigorous than some of the other programs that are available online. That is basically in direct conversation with these type of concepts through the lens of the Islamic tradition. This is something that Yusuf and that myself and Omar have talked about a lot. And this is something that I think that, both of us have gone through this, that we were both people who had a journey where we were looking for certain answers and for certain truth. And we found them in Islam and in the study of the Sharia, right? That when you're philosophically minded, you're looking for certain answers that are available. And if someone doesn't tell you that all the answers that you're looking for are contained within our tradition, then you start going elsewhere and seeking alternatives. You end up in, academia, without a foundation that allows you to understand the questions. You end up in these places, and there's, certain charlatans that are out there that are really pulling our best and brightest, our smartest, and most intellectual and most capable Muslim minds, because of the fact that we don't have a response to that. We don't have an answer to that. Because when people think about studying Islam from a Sunni or from studying from a, what they think about is certain other sciences that are incredibly important, but they're not getting their fix, and they're not getting what they really need in order to answer the questions that are on their mind and that they'll be encountering throughout their life. So what the Sanusi tradition does, which is different from the other programs that we have on ArcView, is that it's broken up into modules and it's broken up into subjects. So for example, in the first year, what you're going to be studying is you're going to be studying Aqida, but not just that, you're also going to be studying Usul al-Fiqh, which we talked about. You're going to be studying Mantiq, and you're going to be studying Tasawwuf as well, which we haven't even talked about, because Tasawwuf and Aqida actually go part and parcel. Kalam, right? Ilm al-Kalam, for example. If someone wants to understand the relationship between that, see the works of Sidi Ahmad Zarruq, see the works of Imam al-Shadhili. Like, for example, read the works of Ibn Ata'illah and understand the concept of what they refer to as Isqat al-Tadbir. This is without, it is almost taken word for word from the chapter of the Qudra of Allah and understanding what is the Qudra of Allah and understanding divine oneness and understanding Tawheed. One understands Tawheed from, and puts it into action. If they truly understand and, embody it from their study of Aqidah, they will become a wali of Allah, without a doubt. If someone were to read the Kubra of Imam al-Sanusi, and were to understand it and truly understand it and truly be able to take it and put it into effect, they would never have a worry in the world again, because they would not be worried about where their risk came from. They would not be worried about where their money came from, where their ends are going to be. And they would understand the power and the greatness of Allah. And they would understand, the oneness. What does it mean for Allah Ta'ala to be one? Very good. Very good. So, and then what we're doing, just to kind of, explain, and we can talk about this after as well, inshallah, is that this is a multi-year program. There is a diploma that's offered after the first year. And then if you continue in the program after 3 years, you actually get a certification. And what we did is that we took some incredible teachers from across the world, teachers who are incredibly qualified. And what we did is that we selected teachers that are actually very well versed in interdisciplinary studies and also have backgrounds in academia. So one of the teachers that we have is a student of Sheikh Said Foda, who's very well known, one of the most important academics in Islam, today. We have others like, for example, Sheikh Zakaria al-Hubba, who's pursuing his PhD on Sidi Ahmed Zarruq. We have others who are involved in higher education, like our very own teachers from other ArcView programs and from Dar al-Fat, like Sheikh Harun Saleh, who are pursuing higher education in the Sharia, who are eventually going to be our foremost experts when it comes to Usul al-Fiqh. And we're going to be studying not just the works of Imam al-Sanusi, because we're not just confining ourselves to the works of Imam al-Sanusi, but rather to the people who are part of this revival of Islamic thought. And along the way, you're going to be studying some of the earliest texts of, Ash'ari thought, or of Sunni thought, so to speak, like the Aqida of Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani. You're going to be studying, seminal texts in Tasawwuf. For example, in the second and third year, we're actually going to be studying the entire Hikam of Ibn Ata'illah in a way that people probably have never studied it before. When you study the Hikam and when it's taught, generally speaking, it's taught in a way that for the laity and for people who have not studied Aqidah. When we study the Hikam, inshallah, we're going to be studying it from the perspective of keeping all of your other studies, right in the, in your vision as well. And so what we're going to be doing is showing you in this program how to create a worldview and how to have a worldview and to draw from all of the various sciences, and don't just sequester ilm al-Kalam to ilm al-Kalam. Start applying the concepts that you're seeing to your study of jurisprudence. Start applying the concepts from Mantiq to your, subjects of inquiry. And then along the way, we're also going to be introducing more sciences, probably some that people have never even thought of or heard of, like the topic of Adab al-Bahth wal-Munadhara, which we're going to cover next year, which is the systematic study of debate and discourse, which is really important to understand, philosophical texts. So there's a lot, inshallah, to offer.
Very, very good. You can find it all at arcview.org. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I have to run. And the difference between a video and a live stream is a live is interactive with the chat. So I have to answer some things in the chat before I leave, because I got guests coming to my house. So the first thing is that the brawl is about to break out in the live stream. So Clutch Films wants to fight Ahmed JH. So we can't really be doing that. A lot of times people take a quote and don't realize what is meant by that quote. So if, for example, if a person like Imam al-Shafi'i said, someone who becomes a Sufi becomes a fool by the afternoon. So does he mean Imam al-Ghazali? The likes of him? Does he mean the likes of Abdul Qadir al-Jailani? Or does he mean specific group at that time that wasn't studying knowledge? They leave off knowledge and they do dhikr. So that's the understanding. When we talk about Ar-Razi and what he meant by rational principles, what it meant, for example, the principle of non-contradiction is an absolute principle, correct? What's the basis of it? Number one, we could say common sense, but number two, we also say the Quran itself. وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. If it was from other than Allah, it will be filled with much contradiction, correct? So that is a principle. Its establishment is both the common sense, common basic logic, and Allah affirms it in the Quran. And the abath is that contradictory speech. And Allah describes himself as Hakim, wise, doesn't have contradictory speech. So what he's saying is that when we have this principle, if there is a verse or a hadith that, look what he says here, any understanding that would contradict another verse, then you do tafweed or ta'weed. And it is no different than what all the other ulama had said. So it means, but he says here, okay. So you go with, you do not accept a direct contradiction. So what is being rejected by the principle? The understanding of the text that is contrary to the principle. That's what's being rejected, not the text itself. And what is the principle? the basic principle of non-contradiction, and its source, okay, its source is the intellect, common sense, which is needed. What does it mean when we need intellect before we can even, the Sharia becomes obligatory upon us? You have to have an intellect, right? But Allah Ta'ala affirms that concept of non-contradiction. That's the long and short of Ar-Razi's concept and the quote that is meant by it. And what I've said, and by the way, we don't take our religion from a person. Did not Sheikh Said Fud at some point, he says Razis can be wrong. And he said Razi was wrong on certain things. So that's why I'm giving you the principle. Razi or other than Razi is irrelevant. Right? We go by the principle. Even if our biggest sheikh came and said something that was mukhalif lil kitab or sunnah or al-ijma' or al-aql, then we would say sheikh is wrong. Simple as that. Okay? If it's a matter of discussion, and our sheikh taught us this, al-Habib Umar bin Salim bin Hafid, someone said to him, one of our shuyukh, one of your students says things we can't handle. We just totally think is wrong. He says it's a matter of nas or ijtihad. He said, no, it's his ijtihadat. He said, if it's my ijtihad, you can differ with me. So what I just told you is the summary of what our aqeedah is. It's not a rational principle that we took from somewhere else. Doesn't match with the Quran. We drop the Quran and keep the rational principle. هذا يكون close to kufr and heresy. And that's exactly what the Sanusiyyats are fighting against. Because here, forget rational principle, he took ilham. Whether it's ilham or rational principle, irrelevant. So all of the sifat of Allah, all of the Quran is established and affirmed. It is a meaning that would contradict another verse of Quran. That is well established. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. You have muhkamat and mutashabihat. The interpretation of a mutashabih, not the verse itself. The interpretation of the verse. The misunderstanding of the verse that would contradict the muhkam verse. That's what would be rejected. Ladies and gentlemen, you guys want to continue this, you can't. Omar,
I do have to hop off as well.
You have to hop off?
Yeah, I have a meeting.
I have to run because I have men coming to my home. Our meeting, we'll take it on the phone. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر والسلام عليكم.
Kalbe şiir